All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be looking into the versatility, the simplicity, and the sure... I was going to say something funny. We're talking about the fighter today. You know, talking before this is a stutter was hard enough. Now, with that and memory problems and everything, it's just... This is a very poor career choice for me. Just putting that out there. So, fighter. We're going to be discussing homebrewing the fighter, and specifically in this one, we're going to be talking about the defining features of the fighter and how they can be homebrewed by looking at some of the ways that they're modified in the player's handbook. So, first things first, the fighter is an original D&D class. I think way back in like original D&D, it might have been called the Fighting Man at one point. I can't 100% remember, but it has been a character that has existed since D&D started. It has always been the character that could use the most weapons, could wear the heaviest armor. And throughout the various editions, there have been kind of modifications and changes because originally, it was a very straightforward class. Really, every turn was, I move, I hit something. And when you had other classes like the rogue that could do, you know, sneak attacks and sneaking around and disabling traps, and you had the wizard that could cast all these really cool spells, the fighter just started to get kind of underwhelming, and at high levels it really couldn't compete with the other classes. So as the editions went on, fighters started having more things that made them a little more unique. In second edition, fighters actually got additional weapon proficiencies. In second edition, you didn't get feats or anything like that, but you did get weapon proficiencies, and fighters got more than other classes, and they could also get higher weapon proficiencies. You could have, I can't remember what the levels were called, but you were basically like trained, proficient, super proficient, and then holy crap, I'm like the coolest dude ever. There were 4 levels that fighters could go in specific weapons, and they would just be able to hit more often and things like that with the weapons. The higher their proficiency in it was, their training in it was. Third edition, when they introduced feats, the thing that made fighters unique is they got more feats than anyone else. They got a bunch of bonus feats, which meant that was the first time you started seeing fighters become the kind of hyper customizable class that kind of exists in 5th edition to today. And then 4th edition, the original fighter was meant to be, you know, kind of your sword and board you can go in, but even in 4th edition, it was designed to be relatively customizable. You could go with your standard sword and board, you know, I go in with my shield and I stab things and I block things, haha. But you could also go the more great weapon fighting style thing. Because one of the cool things with 4th edition was the fact that most classes would have a few different, not really subclasses, but a few different specializations you could do for them. And then there were just tons of different, like, there were fighters, but there were also a bunch of other classes that were technically fighters, but they were different flavors. They turned into cool things, like the Warlord was a really cool fighter kind of subclass thing. But instead of being a striker or a damage dealer or a defender, which was basically your tanks, it was a leader. And so it was actually a strength-based healer. And it was the coolest class ever. It really was super fun and super cool. So then we get to the 5th edition version of the fighter. Excuse me. The 5th edition version of the fighter gets kind of shit on a little bit because it is both the most simplistic class in 5th edition and the most complex simultaneously. And this is coming from the dude that loves to play monks, which are an incredibly complicated class. Fighters can just get crazy. However, it's really, really easy to put fighters into a corner effectively and go, well, all they do is they go forward and they hit things. They're super easy to play. And that is somewhat true. But when you start looking at the different subclasses, when you look at the fact that they actually do get more ability score improvements, which can translate into more feats than any other class, they are hyper customizable to the point where if you're just looking at the PHB and you wanted to be kind of a bow using a ranged attacker style character, a lot of people would default to the ranger because that's kind of what they're known for. The PHB ranger was not super well designed and wasn't a ton of fun to play. And if you really wanted to be able to do just a ton of damage, you generally were better off being a fighter that used a bow. And yeah, it just kind of it kind of reinforces the idea that when you build the fighter correctly, it can be as complex or as simplistic as you want. It is a great class for a first-time player because you can build it in a way that it's very easy to understand. There's not a ton of choices that you have to make, and you always know what you need to do in any situations. Or you can go the exact opposite way where every single round of combat, you've got a dozen different options of what you want to do, and it just depends on what you're feeling at the time. So, yeah, let's go ahead and dive into this class. So, quick reminder, if you're enjoying this stuff, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important for this video to be seen by other people. That being said, quick refresher on 5th edition class design. In 5th edition D&D, every class is designed to play very, very differently right from the beginning. In order to do that, they all have these things that we call defining features. A defining feature is either something that is unique to the class, or maybe it's not unique, but they get it earlier than other classes, or they can use it differently than other classes. If you're going to be homebrewing things to the fighter, you need to understand the defining features because your homebrew needs to interact with them in some way. So what are the defining features of the fighter? Well, I'm glad you asked. The fighter only gets 3 features in the first 2 levels. Those features are fighting style, second wind, and action surge. Of those 3 things, only 2 of them are unique to the fighter. Fighting style shows up in every weapons-based class, but it still fits into the defining features of the fighter because they get it at level 1. They get it earlier than any other class. Off the top of my head, I'm trying to actually remember right now if there are other classes that get a fighting style choice at level 1, and I don't think so, but I'm going to look because I know quite a few before I say the wrong thing. Yeah, barbarians don't get it. I'm just looking at the ones I'm like, is it this one? No, paladins get it at second level. Rangers get it at the second level, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so when we're talking about defining features, and you know, it doesn't have to be unique. It's just they get it earlier. Fighters get their fighting style right at level 1, and a lot of people will undervalue the fighting style because, again, there's a lot of other classes that could get it. Literally, almost every weapon-based class gets some sort of aspect of a fighting style. Paladins get it. Rangers get it, which are the 2 big ones. And there's a bunch of other subclasses that will give you access to a fighting style as well. So it's not something that's unique to the fighter. And the fighting styles themselves are not massive changes. They're not like feats where they massively change how you play your character. They just help you kind of define how you want your character to play. The fighting styles are in the PHB are archery, defense, dueling, great weapon fighting, protection, and two-weapon fighting. But this is generally going to be one of the first decisions you make after you get the main parts of your character built. After you've chosen the race, after you've, given your stats and everything. Basically, once you have the character, once you have the character effectively made, you'll start making your choices for the class itself. And fighting style is going to be your first choice. And this is really going to help you kind of define where you're going to go as far and what weapons you're going to use. And each one of these has something different that's useful. Now, when we're talking about homebrewing, again, a lot of people are not going to care when they're creating their homebrew what fighting style you chose, because all that really does is change which weapon you used. Well, when you look at some of the subclasses for the fighter, you start seeing some of them start emphasizing, well, if you use attacks using a certain kind of weapon, like the Arcane Archer requires you to make attacks with either a short bow or a long bow. This is directly influenced by the fighting style. If you take the archery fighting style, you're definitely going to be using ranged weapons. You most definitely can interact with the fighting style as part of your subclass. And by doing this, you can kind of point players towards where you want them, which fighting style is going to be most beneficial for them when choosing your subclass that you're homebrewing. So you really should understand what these do. Archery just gets you a +2 bonus to attack rolls you make with ranged weapons. So with archery, they're going to be hitting more often. Not doing more damage, but hitting more often, which is really good. However, if you look at the dueling fighting style, which is when you're wielding a melee weapon in one hand and no other weapons, you gain a +2 bonus to damage rolls with that weapon. That's the other one. It goes to damage rolls, and that actually interacts with another defining feature, which is effectively fighters get more attacks than any other class. So that +2 bonus, every time they get an additional attack, whether it's from their extra attack feature, or whether it's from action surge or taking a reaction, they're going to get that +2 again. So it starts out as a +2 bonus, but once you hit 5, that's a +4 bonus per turn. Once you hit 11, that's a +6 bonus per turn. If you're dual wielding, that doesn't work, because dueling doesn't work with two-weapon fighting. Never mind. And if you go to 20th level, that is +4 damage per turn. And that's not talking about any additional attacks you might get as a bonus action based on your subclass or based on other things that happens. Like if you take Polearm Master, you can attack with the other end, which wouldn't work with dueling because you have to be in one hand. I don't know why this is so difficult for me to understand, but anyway, it would work with Shield Bash because a shield doesn't count as a weapon. But anyway, yeah, there's a lot of different things that will combine with these fighting styles. So when you're designing your homebrews, you really should figure out what these are. Even ones that people aren't as fond of. Things like great weapon fighting. I know a lot of people that are not just really happy with great weapon fighting, because all it does is it lets you re-roll dice. Whenever you roll a 1 or 2 in a damage die for an attack you make with a melee weapon that you're wielding with 2 hands, you can re-roll the die and must use the new roll. Even if the new roll is a 1 or a 2, the weapon must have the two-handed or versatile property for you to gain this benefit. A lot of people are like, well, it's really not all that useful. Well, that changes dramatically when you start adding additional damage dice. When you're using a magic weapon that adds additional damage, if you have anything that adds additional damage, like if you multi-class into a ranger and pick up the hunter's marks, this is a spell, or you're able to find another way to maybe get the hex spell or something like that. Well, now your attacks are now rolling an additional die. If you're using a greatsword, that is 2d6 damage instead of 1d12 with like a great axe. Well, that means either one of those d6s could land on a 1 or a 2. It means effectively your minimum roll on those is turned into a 3 instead of a 1. Obviously, you could roll another 1 or to 2, but statistically it changes it. And that can affect your homebrew. Great weapon fighting is going to point them more towards specifically great weapon fighting works best with great swords and any magic weapons or abilities that add additional damage dice to an attack. And if you crit, that's even more. So great weapon fighting works really well with things that allow you to crit a lot, because then you're rolling even more dice and you can re-roll all of them that roll 1s or 2s. So understanding that great weapon fighting not only can point you towards using a great sword versus any other one, or just any weapon that uses multiple smaller damage dice instead of one large damage die, and that it points them towards abilities that increase their crit chance, you can really capitalize on that fact by making your homebrew focus more on using great swords or just using weapons in general that use multiple damage dice in some way, shape, or form. Adding an additional bit of damage to a weapon attack once per turn can be really, really useful with great weapon fighting compared to any of the other ones. So again, as much as a lot of people go, oh, fighting style, that's that thing you choose once and you never deal with it again. No. Look at it. Look at the things that they offer you. Protection gives you a use for your reaction. Defense just gives you a static bonus to your AC. Two-weapon fighting gives you additional damage on your turn. All of these things are going to shape how they play their character when they get to level 3, and they're going to choose their subclass. So think about these things. And don't forget, we're only talking about the PHB, but Tasha's added a bunch of new fighting styles, some of which are exclusive to the fighter. The PHB fighting styles, all of these fighting styles show up in other classes somewhere. But Tasha's actually has a few that are 100% exclusive to the fighter. So that can be even more something that you start to focus on with your homebrews. So learn the different fighting styles and don't feel bad about going, okay, well, when they choose this class, this subclass at 3rd level, what fighting styles do I think are going to work best, and lean into those as part of your class design. It will make it a much more fun class to play. Moving on. The second thing that fighters get at 1st level is called Second Wind. Second Wind is a remarkably simple ability. And this is another thing that makes a lot of people think, well, fighters are very, very simple classes. Second Wind is literally, on your turn, you can use a bonus action to regain hit points equal to 1d10 plus your fighter level. Once you use this feature, you must finish a short or long rest before you can use it again. That's all it is. Once per short rest, you get a self-heal as a bonus action. That's all it is. Again, it seems very, very simple. It seems very, very straightforward. But it changes how you play the fighter. And it fits into the kind of theme of the fighter. The fighter, the two things the fighter does better than any other class is it has more attacks than any other class. And it tends to be very tanky if you build it that way. They can wear every kind of armor, and they can use every kind of weapon. So you can be in full plate plus a shield, and without any magic items have an AC of 20. 21 if you choose the defense fighting style. That's no magic, no boosts, no nothing. That is your armor class. And again, in 5th edition, armor classes do not go high. The most difficult creature in the monster manual currently has an armor class of 26. That is the most difficult creature to hit in the entirety of Dungeons & Dragons, has a 26. So being able to get a 21 without using any magic weapons, without using anything that improves your armor class in any way, shape, or form is huge. Then you combine that with things like magic shields, can increase your armor class. Magic armor can increase your armor class. There's a bunch of magic items that can increase your armor class. Ion stones, bracers of defense. There's tons of them. Fighters can become very, very tanky. And second wind is effectively allows them to go into the middle of combat in their big tanky form and be able to deal with damage. 1d10 plus your fighter level is not a ton of hit points, but it's enough. It's enough for it to be noticeable, and it's a bonus action. Bonus action means they can use their action to do whatever they want. They can use their action to make their attacks, obviously. They can use their action to replace attacks with shoves, which can either move enemies around or knock them prone, making the enemies have disadvantage on all attack rolls, and making any melee attack rolls against them have advantage. They can use their action to take the dodge action and make all attacks against them have disadvantage, which when you're rocking a 21 to your ACC, having disadvantage on the attack rolls means a lot of people aren't going to hit. All of those things can happen, and they can still heal themselves just out of the blue. Again, a lot of people kind of undervalue just how useful second wind can be. The fact that it's a bonus action, the fact that it does a decent amount of healing. At level 10, you can get a maximum of 20 hit points. That is easily a full attack that has hit you. You have just completely wiped out. Is it enough that, it's going to, massively change the game? No. But when you combine that with the fact that you can do other things on your turn in addition to your second wind, it's a very, very useful feature. If you are building a subclass and you want to build a more tanky, very resilient style subclass, lean into second wind. Give it additional features. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of any of the subclasses that actually mess with second wind. Which is weird. Second wind is another one of those things where it shows up for the fighter, and then it's never talked about again, kind of like Druidic from the Druid. But I could definitely see a subclass being built around modifying second wind in some way, shape, or form, to add different benefits to it, and it being a very interesting, fun subclass. So do not forget that is a thing. And it's a very useful thing, and it already has limitations built into it. It's a bonus action. It's once per short or long rest. I've mentioned before about quote-unquote one-and-done abilities. This one, because it's a bonus action, and because it gives a decent amount of a healing, not a ton, but a decent amount, a lot of people will use second wind a lot more often than other one-and-done abilities, because it's not a huge investment, and extra hit points are always useful. So having a subclass that modifies the second wind can, unless you do something really broken, like it goes, now it does, 1d10 plus quadruple your fighter level. Well, that's going to break the game. But as long as you don't put something just too broken for a bonus action ability, you can do some really interesting, cool things with second wind. Including possibly giving additional uses of it in certain situations, or finding ways to regain your use of second wind. The Gunslinger has a really interesting aspect where if you crit, you can regain grit points, which are what you use for your trick shots in that. Building a subclass around the idea that you can regain your second wind will allow the player to be much more reckless when they're doing things. And if you build a subclass around just being reckless, it could be a really interesting subclass. One of my favorite moments from early Acquisitions Incorporated, this was before they started doing live shows, when it was just a podcast. one of the things they used to do is the original team of Acquisitions Incorporated was Omen Dran, the cleric, Jim Dark Magic, the wizard, and Binwin Bronzebottom, the fighter. And this was 4th edition. None of them had the ability to reliably find traps. None of them had skills that were used, had trained themselves in skills that could use that. None of them just had good trap findings, in a sense. So the way that they found most of their traps is Binwin would trip them. Binwin would go first because he had the most hit points, and then Omen would heal him. Building a character, a fighter subclass basically called the Trap Finder or something similar to that, where they're just built around the idea of, I will find traps by tripping them, or I will figure out which is the most dangerous enemy by getting punched by them. That could be a really interesting subclass, and it could lean really heavily into Second Wind and doing interesting things with it. Like maybe anytime an enemy gets a crit on you, you can regain your Second Wind. Or anytime you trip a trap intentionally, you can regain a use of your Second Wind. Things like that could be super cool and interesting and create a very chaotic character. Anyway, so that's just the Second Wind. Finally, we move on to the final defining feature, and this is the one that most people think about when they think of the fighter, and that is Action Surge. On your turn, you can take 1 additional action. Once you use this feature, you must finish a short or long rest before you can use it again. Starting at 17th level, you can use it twice before a rest, but only once in the same turn. Action Surge is the big defining feature of the fighter. I've mentioned before, fighters get more attacks than any other class. Technically, that is not always true. At first level, a fighter at most can get 2 attacks in a turn if they're dual wielding. If they're using 2 weapons for fighting, they get a regular attack and an offhand attack. And I don't know why I always go regular attack and offhanded attack when this is my left hand and I am right-handed, but I do. So, monks at the same level. Nope, not until 2nd level can they get more. Monks at 2nd level can get 3 attacks in a turn, where fighters can only get 2. When you get up to 5th level, fighters at most can get 3 attacks. They get 2 attacks and then an offhand attack if they're dual wielding. Monks can get 4, but it requires burning a limited resource, burning their key to do that. Action Surge is what changes that, because Action Surge gives you 1 additional action. And this is probably the most important thing when you are building a subclass that you have to understand. Fighters can take multiple actions in a single turn. One of the most mind-blowing things to see people do is to watch a wizard take 2 levels of fighter and then cast Fireball twice in the same turn. Well, wait a minute, Jody. That's not possible because if you cast a spell on your turn, you're only allowed to cast a cantrip. That's what it says in the spellcasting. No, it doesn't. What it says in the spellcasting section is specifically if you use your bonus action to cast a leveled spell, then you can only cast cantrips for the rest of that turn. Using Action Surge, you don't use your bonus action to cast a spell, you use your action. And this has been ruled on by Crawford and Perkins. This is intentional. Action Surge gives you an additional action. So, we've talked many times, countless times almost, about how important action economy is in 5th edition. Whichever side has more specific things they can do, more actions in general, that includes actions, bonus actions, movement, reactions, all of those things. Whichever one has more is going to have an advantage in the fight. That includes extra attack and things like that. Action Surge, because it gives you an additional action, works with extra attack. So at 5th level, you can make 2 attacks as part of your attack action. With Action Surge, that means if you take Action Surge, you can make 4 attacks by using 2 attack actions. You see how that works? That means anything in your subclass that requires an action can be used twice in the same turn by a fighter unless you put specific limitations on it. Like the Arcane Archer has specific wording that says you can only use an arcane shot once per turn to prevent Action Surge from making it massively broken. That is something that you need to think about when you are homebrewing. Anything you create, a fighter can do twice in the same turn. And when they get to 7th level, they can do it twice in the same turn for 2 turns. So understand that that is a thing that can happen. Understand anything that you link to an attack, like adding additional damage to an attack for whatever reason, Action Surge is going to compound that significantly. Because the more attacks they have for a single action, like at 11th level, they can make 3 attacks per action. With Action Surge, that's 6 attacks. So if you add just a single D6 to a single round of combat or single turn for an 11th level fighter, that is an additional 6d6 damage. That's why you have to understand Action Surge. It's one of the biggest changers in the game. This is the only thing in the game other than, I believe, 9th level spells. I know there's at least one 8th or 9th level spell that actually gives you an additional turn effectively. Actually, a couple of them. But it's extremely limited in what you can do on that to the turn. Action Surge changes the action economy. It is done by... it is done on purpose. That is why fighters are not the super simplistic class that people play them out to be. They're actually remarkably complex when they want to, and Action Surge gives them that ability. Eldritch Knights that Action Surge can cast a spell and make an attack on the same turn. Eventually, they can get high enough where they can cast a spell, make an attack as a bonus action, and then make a bunch of other attacks or cast another spell on top of that using Action Surge. Action Surge is a remarkably good ability. And planning your homebrew to include it is something that is essential. Okay, so those are the defining features of the fighter. Now, how can you modify those defining features? Well, let's look at the 3 subclasses that show up in that show up in the player's handbook. We're going to start off with my personal favorite fighter subclass, which is the Battlemaster. I mentioned before in 4th edition there was a flavor of fighter called the Warlord. It was a leader, which meant it was the healer version. But one of the cool things that the Warlord could do is they were battlefield commanders. They could hand out actions to other characters, and it was a super fun class to play. Like, I cannot tell you how much fun playing a Warlord in 4th edition was, especially with just how crazy and over the top 4th edition got. You could have really interesting things happening where you're like, you over there, hurl a fireball, or you over there, stab through them and destroy them. Like, it was just cool stuff that you could do. The Battlemaster is kind of meant to mimic what the Warlord could do, but it does it in a very different way. Like, the Battlemaster is technically the 5th edition equivalent to the Warlord, but it is a very different flavored Warlord, and it doesn't have the healing abilities and the versatility that the Warlord did. This is much more a kind of combat leader as opposed to the Warlord, which really, when you were playing it well, would stand back from combat and very rarely made its own attacks. So the Battlemaster gives you this cool thing called combat superiority at the third level, and this modifies effectively two different things. One thing is it does interact with your fighting style, and again, a lot of people will kind of forget that that's a thing, but the maneuvers that you can choose, there's a ton of different ones, and they all do different things. So your fighting style is going to affect which maneuvers that you choose. There are more defensive maneuvers, things like bait and switch, where you can physically move, switch places with another willing creature and increase their ACC. Brace allows you to use your reaction to make an attack when someone enters your attack range, which means if you're doing something like great weapon fighting, where you're using two-handed weapons and you're using something like a glaive, which is has reach, brace can be really, really useful. And considering that when you're making your homebrews, like this is a perfect example of, okay, well, I'm going to make a bunch of different options for the Battle Master that fit into each one of those categories. You know, Commander's Strike. When you take the attack action, you can forego one of your attacks and use a bonus action to direct your companions to strike. So that's the one where you're giving out attacks. Disarming Attack. When you hit a creature with a weapon attack, you can expend a superiority dice to attempt to disarm the target. That doesn't have to be... Man, a lot of people think Disarming Attack, oh, I go through with my rapier and I twirl it around and their weapon flies away. Well, yeah, but you can also use it with a bow. And that can be even more fun, to just be sitting there going... You shoot their hand, and they're like, ow! And they drop their sword. And then somebody nearby you, one of your allies nearby, picks it up, and they no longer have a weapon. You know, there's a lot of cool things that you can do with that, and you have to understand how that's going to modify the fighting style. In addition, this modifies effectively the action surge, or just the extra attacks. Action surge is effectively gets modified by extra attacks. So extra attacks is technically a defining feature for the fighter as well. Most of these attacks require you to make an attack some way. Or a lot of the attacks, not even most, but a lot of the attacks require you to make an attack, and it adds on to the things. Again, things like goading attack. When you hit a creature with a weapon attack, you spend one superiority die to attempt to goad the target into attacking you. You add the superiority die to the attack's damage rolls. Going back to that great weapon fighter, where you can re-roll ones into the twos. Well, you're adding this to the damage roll of that attack. So when you roll a 1 on the superiority die, for the damage, you can re-roll it. So all these things really kind of fit together and modify both of those things, and really vastly expand what the fighter can do. Also, I mentioned this in the Druid one, the superiority dice is a pool of dice. You get physical dice. I like physical dice. I really do. I think they're a cool mechanic. They start as D8s, and you get extra superiority dice at 7th level and 15th level. So you get more dice as they go along. So, yeah. Getting beyond 3rd level in the maneuvers, you eventually get Know Your Enemy, which again I'm not a huge fan of because it doesn't really tell you anything that's super useful. But 10th level, your superiority dice turn into D10s. 18th level, they turn into D12s. That turns into some pretty decent stuff. And again, anything that says when you hit a creature, like goading attack, means you, before you have to make the choice about whether or not you're going to use it, you know if you got a crit or not. So adding a goading attack onto a crit means you're adding 2 D10s or 2 D12s at 18th level instead of just 1 to the damage roll. So all those things. And then Relentless, when you roll initiative, you have no superiority dice, meaning you regain 1 superiority die. It just means that you can use it more often. That is the class. And this is a really good example of a homebrew class introducing a new feature as part of the class. The superiority dice are a brand new limited resource that you have not dealt with previously for your character. They introduce them, and then other than 7th level, which is more of a role-playing ability, every improvement after it modifies the original thing that you introduced. This is a super common thing for subclasses to do, is they will introduce whatever it is that defines the subclass. Subclasses have defining features too, and they're whatever you get when you choose this as a subclass. So you add your defining aspect of the subclass, and then you will just improve that specific feature as you level up. It's really common. It works really well, and in general, it's technically fairly easy to balance as well. Just through some play testing. When you get to certain levels, you start noticing, okay, this just isn't feeling as good. You can have wherever your nearest subclass feature is, you can just go, okay, on this level, we're going to increase the die, or we're going to increase the number of dice that you get to use, or we're going to increase a modifier in some way. It's remarkably easy to balance by using your subsequent class feature levels as ways to improve the base thing that comes with this as a subclass. Another thing that's really common is just seeing additional options be added. So when you get to higher levels, you can try doing this time. It would have been really overpowered to give that to a 3rd level character, but for a 12th level character, yeah, give them this ability. It's cool that way. So yes, perfect example of designing a subclass to really take advantage of the base class itself. The fact that fighters get a lot more attacks means they're going to have a lot more chances to use most of these abilities. And then just keep pumping up the abilities as they get higher and higher means that the class is never going to feel underpowered. They're always going to feel like there's something that they can do. And they do that in a couple different ways. They give them additional superiority dice so they can just do their things more. And then they turn the superiority dice into higher dice. So, yeah, really good example. Moving forward, the next one that shows up in the player's handbook is the champion. The champion fighter is your really simple fighter. It is designed to not give you a ton of choices that you have to make. It's designed to work. And it starts off with 3rd level, you get improved critical. You can crit on a 19 or a 20 instead of just a 20. This is really useful, and again, it will definitely modify how you play the class. I know because it doesn't require you to make any choices, it just makes it easier to crit. A lot of people will just do your kind of sword and board fighter and then make him a champion, and then it's a really simple, easy class to run. But like I've said before, Great Weapon Fighter works really well with expanded crit ranges, and that's what improved critical does. So making a champion fighter that uses a great sword can be absolutely devastating when they become a champion and can start re-rolling crit dice and things like that. Like, they on average are going to do more damage than other characters because they just always get to re-roll 1s into the 2s at least once per turn. And yeah, when we go up to 7th level, again, it is a really simple thing. You can add half your proficiency bonus to any strength, dex, or constitution checks you make that doesn't already use your proficiency bonus, and your running long jump distance is increased. Again, this is something that just changes on the character sheet. It doesn't require you to remember anything in combat or anything in the moment. You just change the numbers on the character sheet. You were set to go. Very simple. Very effective, except for the fact that they add constitution checks. There are no constitution checks in 5th edition D&D. The only thing you ever use your constitution for is constitution saving throws, and checks and saving throws are different things. So I've never understood why they put that in there, because it's a completely pointless thing. But there are plenty of strength and dexterity checks. Tons and tons and tons of them. And basically, anything you're not trained in, getting that at least a little of your proficiency bonus is always going to be nice. At 10th level, you can choose a section option for your fighting style class feature. Again, another thing that you just make a modification to the character sheet once at level up, and then you don't have to remember it again. It's already on there. And again, it gives you the same options as before. Something that's really, really common to see is the first fighting style you choose at level 1 will be something that's a little bit more offensive. The one you choose at level 10, I've seen a lot of people choose defense. Just because a +1 bonus to your AC is always useful, and it doesn't require you using a different weapon type. For almost everything else here, you might have to change your weapon type to take advantage of it. Like if you have great weapon fighting, and then you take archery, well, you're never going to be able to use those in the same turn. Or dueling and great weapon fighting, you literally cannot use those on the same attack. But if you're using a versatile weapon, dueling and great weapon fighting means you can make a choice. If you go the dueling route, you can just get an extra +2 damage every time you hit. If you decide to go versatile, you can re-roll damage dice. So it gives you choices, but again, they're mutually exclusive choices. You can't use both dueling and great weapon fighting. So this one is one that you do have to kind of look at. The ones that I see the most often are either protection or defense from the PHP stuff. When you start looking at the optional ones, there's a lot of really cool optional ones that you could choose at 10th level. Adding blind fighting is really, really useful. Adding interception is really, really useful. Superior technique can give you a battle master maneuver. Unarmed fighting is another one that can be really, really useful. You can make an unarmed strike when you're wielding a weapon. For anyone without the unarmed fighting feat or monks, or who aren't monks, an unarmed strike does 1+ your strength modifier if you hit and you're proficient in it. So unarmed strike is anything like a headbutt, a shoulder charge, kicking him, something like that. It's all stuff you can do while you're still wielding a weapon. Unarmed fighting just makes it significantly more useful, and it also gives you a benefit to grappling creatures, which grappling really isn't used anywhere near as much as I think it should be in 5th edition. And unarmed fighting, at the start of each of your turns, you can deal 1d4 bludgeoning damage to one creature grappled by you. It means if you have a creature grappled, you get instant damage at the start of your turn for no action cost. You don't use your action, your bonus action, your reaction, anything. This is just extra damage that you get to do while you're also stabbing them. So yeah, the additional fighting styles become significantly more useful once you start using the optional fighting styles. But even the ones in here, and again, this is modifying the fighting style thing. This is the only I believe this is the only subclass, definitely the only one in the Player's Handbook that actually modifies that by just giving you a second one. And planning out your character and picking which one of these is going to benefit the most for your character is going to be really, really critical. And then superior critical at 15, you get an 18 to 20. Again, that's pretty simple. And then survivor, at the start of each of your turns, you gain hit points equal to 5 plus your con modifier if you have no more than half your hit points left. You don't gain this benefit if you have 0 hit points. Again, another thing that is really, really simple. 5 plus your con modifier is not going to change mid-battle. You can just write on your character sheet, when I'm under this amount, I get this many hit points at the start of my turn. Again, very simple, very straightforward. Even at 18th level, when things are starting to get very complicated, the champion fighter is remarkably simple. It doesn't mean it's boring, or that doesn't mean that it can't be a really, really useful, powerful class, especially when you start talking feats and things like that. But it's designed to be very straightforward. And Survivor kind of modifies your second wind in the idea that it's another healing thing, so you don't have to rely on your second wind quite as much. But even that it is a very loose connection. So yeah, that is the champion fighter. Again, it is the most simplistic of the PHB ones, but even then, when you're looking at this, if you want to create a really straightforward, simple homebrew class, doing things like improved critical, I would probably say avoid doing the actual improved critical, because that is a defining feature that you're a champion. If you take that away from them, you're doing them a disservice. But doing things that just add a flat bonus to something, or just something that they can just put on their character sheet and never have to recalculate again, or only have to recalculate on level ups, can be a really nice, straightforward way to do things. I have a hard time coming up with an example of a champion style subclass that doesn't exist already, because champion is literally as simple as it gets. It's a really well designed subclass, don't get me wrong, but if you wanted to go that simple with a new subclass, I think it would be hard to not effectively piggyback on the champion and be making, well, this is a champion with one change to the thing, which for me isn't really a subclass. That's a feat. You know, if you're like, well, I like the champion, but I wish you could do this, create a feat. It'll work better. Anyway, moving on. There we go. Had to get to the right one. The final subclass in the PHB is the Eldritch Knight. Eldritch Knights are magic fighters. Mixing magic and fighting has existed since original D&D. Elf, instead of being a race, used to be a class, and they were kind of hybrid fighter spellcasters. That was what they did. If you wanted to play someone that could use, you know, swords and also cast spells, you chose the elf. And they basically could do both of those, but compared to a fighter, they were significantly weaker melee-wise, and compared to a wizard, they were significantly limited spellcasting-wise. That was what they did. Because they could do both, they didn't do either one as well as the core classes. And this is something that's incredibly important when you are doing this. Basically, I'm going to add this flavor to this class. If you want to add a divine aspect to a class, basically merging it slightly with a cleric or something, you need to understand there needs to be limitations built into it, so that taking your subclass doesn't replace multiclassing between the two classes. Multiclassing already exists, and again, a big part of 5th edition class design is getting rid of excess bloat. If you can already do it, you don't need to create a subclass or a new class for it. It goes against the very idea of 5th edition of stripping away all the additional redundancies and all the additional bulk and bloat and the things like that. So Eldritch Knight's a really good example of how to add some spellcasting flavor without basically going, oh, well, this is a multi-class wizard fighter. It's not. You get things in the Eldritch Knight you can't get through multi-classing. And you get things through multi-classing you can't get through the Eldritch Knight. And that's how it should be. So what do you get? You get some cantrips, which are always useful. With the fighter, cantrips actually kind of fight against the fighter, because to use a cantrip, you have to use the cast a spell action. Fighters get more attacks than any other class. So at 3rd level, when you get this, choosing a cantrip over an attack isn't that big a difference. Cantrips are going to do similar amounts of damage to your attacks unless you're dual wielding. However, when you get to 5th level, now you have to choose between making a single cantrip attack or 2 weapon attacks. And the 2 weapon attacks get to add your damage modifier twice, whereas cantrips generally won't add any damage modifier. So that's when things start getting a little bit more complicated and cantrips start becoming less useful, which is what the rest of the class deals with. Eldritch Knights also get spell slots. They have their own spellcasting table that shows the amount of slots they get. They're effectively what is called a third caster. The reason that we call them a third caster is in the multi-classing rules. In the multi-classing spell casting, they actually have specific rules about how many spell slots you get when you multi-class. And when you are counting levels of Eldritch Knight or a couple other third casters, you take the number of levels you have in that class and divide it by 3 to figure out what your overall spell casting level is. So that's what we call it, a third caster. A half caster gets spells up to 5th level. A third caster only gets spells up to 4th level, and they have significantly less spell slots. So this is even more limited than a half caster, and it should be. Unlike a wizard, you don't have a spell book for this. You just learn and memorize spells, very similar to a bard or a sorcerer. And then as it goes on, you will learn more spells, basically every like 3 or 4 levels, roughly. Sometime, I guess it's closer to every 2 or 3 levels. You will learn at least one new spell. Anytime you get access to a new level of spells, you will learn at least one new spell. And yeah, that's how you play this class. However, they get another thing that at 3rd level that I think is really, really interesting, and I really, really love, because again, it interacts with the defining features really well. And this is another thing you need to worry about when you are choosing what you want to add to your homebrew. Weapon bond. Weapon bond is this really interesting thing where they can bond with a weapon. It takes them an hour. You can do it over a short rest. Once you've bonded a weapon to yourself, you can't be disarmed of that weapon unless you are incapacitated. If it is on the same plane of existence, you can summon that weapon as a bonus action on your turn, causing it to instantly teleport to your hands. You can have up to 2 bonded weapons, but you can only summon one at a time with your bonus action. If you attempt to bond the 3rd weapon, you must break the bond with one of the other 2. So, weapon bond changes how you can play the class. Specifically, if you want to use weapons with the thrown property. What do you mean by that? Well, you can throw a weapon, call it back to you as a bonus action, throw it again, and then go over and pick it up, pick it out of them after you're done. If you miss, you can call it back to your hand. You can play Thor, folks. Stuff like that. And it significantly increases the things that you can do. Now, it's not perfect. It's not like every time you throw the weapon, it's going to come back to you. It's not a returning weapon or anything like that, like the Artificer gets. It's not a dwarven thrower. But it does mean that you have additional choices as far as what you want to do. And if you do have things that proc on hits, things like the damage feats from Tasha's, you can choose, oh, I want to do something to that dude over there, but I also want to fight this dude. Throw your weapon over there, call it back, and then run over to this guy and attack him. And do cool things like that. It does require you to use a weapon with the thrown property. But again, this is another thing that can vastly change the fighting style that you use. If you have the dueling ability and you have a thrown weapon like a light hammer or something, dueling works with that. It's just a weapon attack with a melee weapon in one hand and no have any other. Dueling will work with you throwing the weapon and then calling it back and either throwing it again or running up and beating them with it. It adds a lot of versatility, and this is another thing you want to think about when you're homebrewing, is if you do add something like weapon bond or just anything along that lines that seems a little bit more kind of role-playing, there are major things that can change in combat. Like Weapon Bond requires you, you perform a ritual over the course of 1 hour. And this is an ability that was taken from the Sword Mage in 4th edition. I played a Sword Mage for over a year. Sword Mages are super, super fun in 4th edition. But they had this ability, they could just call their weapon back to them as a minor action. And this is, the Eldritch Knight is the Sword Mage of 5th edition. So that's where it came from, but I cannot tell you how useful it was to be able to call my weapon to me in 4th edition. And same is true here. So when you're thinking about other things that you could add to your homebrew, this is a weapon-based class. So giving them different ways that they can interact with their weapons that aren't necessarily attacks can be really, really fun. Being able to manifest their weapon from a pocket dimension or something. Being able to have their weapon act on its own. Being able to turn their weapon sentient. Be careful with sentient weapons. All these different things, different ways. Being able to modify their weapon to be 2 different weapons in one. Things like that are simple additions that can become very, very interesting very, very quickly. So remember things like that. War Magic deals with the issue with cantrips. And at 7th level, when you use your action to cast a cantrip, you make 1 weapon attack as a bonus action. So now, use your action to cast a cantrip. Bonus action, you get to make an attack. You're going to be doing better damage at 7th level because you only have 2 attacks versus a cantrip, which is going to do a little bit more damage than a single attack, but generally not more damage than 2 weapon attacks. Now you can use the cantrip, do more damage than 1 attack, and then you still get another attack as your bonus action. Really useful. When we combine that with Action Surge, again, always remember that Action Surge exists, you can make cantrip, bonus action attack, Action Surge, 2 more attacks, do a lot of things that are really cool. Moving further, when you hit a creature with a weapon attack, the creature has disadvantage on the next saving throw it makes against a spell you cast before the end of your next turn. So, combining War Magic with Eldritch Strike, use a cantrip, hit them with an attack. They're going to have disadvantage on the next saving throw it makes against a spell you cast. The next turn, you might cast a leveled spell because they're going to have disadvantage on the attack. Bonus action, cantrip, or Action Surge, cantrip, bonus action, attack. The next turn, you can make another leveled spell attack that they're going to have disadvantage on the attack roll. Again, always understand Action Surge is already always there. It means you're going to be able to do multiple things in a turn. And this really starts dealing with the fact that cantrips versus weapon attacks, the higher your level gets and the more attacks you get, the less useful the cantrip is. And then 15th level, they get Arcane Charge. You get to teleport anytime you use your Action Surge. You can teleport before or after the additional action. Another thing that's super, super cool and interesting. And then finally, starting at 18th level, when you use your action to cast a spell, you make 1 weapon attack as a bonus action. Now, cantrip, bonus attack. Next to the turn, spell, bonus attack. Action Surge, spell. Next turn. And because of that, it goes spell, bonus attack. You had disadvantage from the first one there. Do your bonus attack, they're going to have disadvantage again. Action Surge, another spell. You've cast 2 turns, or 2 spells in the same turn that have both had disadvantage on their saving throws. That's what you can do with this. And it's a beautiful, like, again, they don't have a ton of spell slots. At 20th level, they have 4 first, 3 second, 3 third, 1 fourth. These are not going to be massively overpowered spells, but when you combine them with the fact that they're beating you to death with their weapon, there's a lot of cool stuff that they can do. So going back to homebrewing, if you're going to add some sort of spell casting to the class for whatever way, first of all, if all you're going to do is add spells, you don't need to. Eldritch Knight already exists. However, if you want to go something outside of this, you need to understand the additional attacks and action surge means your spells will get significantly less useful compared to making 3 or 4 attacks. So understand that balance and make sure that whenever you are giving them spells, you need to come up with a way for them to be able to weave the spells in. And in general, giving them the ability to bonus action cast spells is generally a bad idea. Let the sorcerers deal with that. There are so many things built into the sorcerer that make that more difficult for them, so it's not overpowered. You don't need to add that to a fighter. But turning a druid version of the Eldritch Knight or a cleric version of the Eldritch Knight could be really interesting. Just understand and feel free to template it. You know, again, you have this here, and you go, I really like this, but I'd much rather a cleric version. Well, I mean, the paladin already exists, which is a divine version of the Eldritch Knight. So if you're going to go down that road, make sure you don't already have a way to do that. If you want to make a divine version of the Eldritch Knight, find a way to make the Eldritch Knight, the divine knight, I guess we could call it, different than a paladin. Understand that the paladin already exists. So yeah. Anyway, final thoughts. Again, the fighter is both the most simplistic class in the game and the most complex, because they get more ability score improvements, which can turn into feats, and because they get so many additional, because they get extra attacks, and because they have that action surge, they can get very, very complex very, very quickly. And multi-classing a fighter can turn things very interesting very quickly. So if you're making a subclass for a fighter, understand additional attacks are very valuable. All of your additional attacks add your ability score to the damage. So understand, if you are giving them anything that just gives them a flat addition to damage, that is going to compound really, really quickly, especially once you hit 11th level. You're getting 3 attacks per turn plus an action surge. That can turn into a very broken thing very quickly. Don't forget your fighting styles. Fighting styles are super cool, and they're going to frame how the rest of the character plays. Don't feel bad about giving additional fighting styles. The champion did it. If you're in a situation where you're like, you know, I'm looking for something on here and just nothing is really feeling right, giving them an additional fighting style, maybe even just a limited choice of additional fighting styles, can be a really cool way to kind of guide the class, the subclass, in the way that you will want it. If you're building kind of a much more tankier thing, then maybe it's, you know, at 10th level, you give them a fighting style option, but they have to choose between like protection and defense, or whatever that one is that I can never remember. Protection, yeah, defense. There we go. They have to choose between protection and defense. You know, things like that. Fighting styles are a fighter thing, so lean into them as much as you can. And then don't forget Second Wind. Second Wind allows a fighter to be more reckless. It allows them to use their bonus action to heal, so they can use their action to do cool shit. So, in your homebrew subclasses, don't ignore this as a Second Wind. Let it do something cool. Let it do something interesting. If you want to build a homebrew class around Second Wind, or even just one aspect of your homebrew class is going to give a benefit to Second Wind, understand that is basically giving them permission to be more reckless, to get further away from the healer, to go further into the enemy controlled to the territory, because they don't have to worry as much about getting hurt. They can bonus action and be right back in the fighting. Lean into that. If you want to make a reckless class, play with Second Wind. Don't make it massively overpowered. We, again, don't want to turn the fighter into someone that is impossible to kill. That's not fun for anyone, because everyone else has to worry about, oh no, I might die, and the fighter's like, nah, I'm good. So understand those things. Otherwise, that is going to be all for me today. As always, again, like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. What is your personal favorite defining feature of the fighter? And by that, I mean, what do you think you could do the most fun things with? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today, and I'll see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.